Did you know that your legs are the first to weaken as you age? And once they do, everything else follows. Falling becomes a risk, mobility decreases, and independence slips away. But here's the good news. There's a way to fight back. Today, I'll share 3 powerful exercises that will keep your legs strong, stable, and healthy. If you want to stay active and avoid the struggles of weak legs, pay close attention. Did you know that the first betrayal of age comes not in the hands or the back, not in the eyes or even the mind, but in the legs? The legs, those quiet bearers of our burdens, the silent allies of every journey, weaken before anything else, and once they do, the world grows smaller. The rooms of the house stretch farther apart, the steps outside become mountains, and the long walk to the store turns into an impossible odyssey. This is not merely an inconvenience, it is a thief, robbing a man or woman of the quiet dignity of independence. One does not notice it at first. Perhaps there is a slight hesitation before rising from a chair, a moment's pause at the foot of the stairs. Then, one day, the body falters where once it strode with certainty. And worst of all, what follows is not merely a slow pace, but a loss of courage. It is not only the legs that weaken. It is the will, the confidence, the certainty that one can still go where one pleases, without fear of stumbling, without the humiliating possibility of falling like a toppled tree in the presence of strangers. But if the descent begins in the legs, so too can the rescue. Strength is not only the privilege of youth, nor is weakness an unavoidable sentence of old age. The body is far kinder than we often give it credit for. It is a servant always willing to obey, provided we command it with discipline and persistence. And so, a man must train his legs as he would train his mind, with diligence and purpose, as he surrender his freedom to something as preventable as frailty. For the legs are not mere appendages, they are the foundation, the pillars upon which all else stands. To neglect them is to invite not only weakness, but dependence. And there is no burden heavier than the knowledge that one must rely on others for the simplest of tasks. It is not merely the strength of muscle that is at stake, but the assurance of movement itself. A child does not question his ability to rise and run, but a man who has known weakness cannot step forward without calculating the risk. He begins to avoid the long walks. There are few things more humbling than the realization that one's own body has become an unreliable companion. A man who has spent his life standing tall, who has risen and sat 1,000 times without thought, who has strode through the world with the certainty of strength, suddenly finds himself hesitating before a simple chair. He lowers himself carefully, bracing against the arms, mindful of his knees, of the slight tremble in his legs. And when the time comes to stand again, there is a pause, a moment's calculation, as though he were lifting some great burden rather than merely rising to his feet. It is not that the world has changed, but that his own limbs have betrayed him, and in that betrayal something deeper stirs. A quiet fear that grows louder with each passing day. Yet it is not the way of a man to submit easily, nor should it be. Strength, after all, is not merely the privilege of the young, nor is decline the inevitable fate of those who have seen many seasons. The body is a servant that will obey so long as one commands it rightly. And so, the work begins, not in grand gestures or impossible feats, but in the simple mastery of motion. The squat, that most basic of movements, is where one must begin again, not as a child learning for the first time, but as a man reclaiming what was lost. It is no small thing to lower oneself with grace and to rise again with certainty. The world does not see this battle. There is no applause, no grand recognition, and yet it is in these quiet victories that independence is preserved. To sit without fear and to stand without struggle, this is the right of every man. But rights are not kept without effort. One must train, must practice, must endure the slight ache in the thighs, the protest of the knees, until one day, without realizing it, the hesitation is gone. A man no longer wonders whether he will rise, he simply does. But strength alone is not enough. There is another enemy lurking, far more insidious than mere weakness. It is imbalance. The subtle thief that turns solid ground into treacherous terrain. The young do not think of balance. They move without thought, step from curb to street without fear, lean forward and backward without a moment's pause. But the man who has known the betrayal of his own legs knows better. He knows how the ground can shift unexpectedly, how a single misstep can send him sprawling, how even a small stumble can cost him dearly. And so he must train for balance as he trains for strength, not with the reckless energy of youth, but with the quiet persistence of one who understands the stakes. It is a simple thing to rise onto one's toes, to hold steady, to lower again, a motion so small that it seems almost foolish to count it as exercise. And yet in this small act a battle is fought and won. The ankles grow steadier, the legs more sure, the ground beneath less uncertain. There is something noble in reclaiming what once seemed effortless. A man who trains himself to stand with confidence, to move without hesitation, to walk with purpose, is a man who refuses to yield to time. He is not clinging desperately to youth. He is simply refusing to surrender to weakness. And in that refusal, there is dignity, there is strength, there is the quiet assurance that he will go where he pleases, unaided, unafraid. There is a moment in every life when one realizes that the body is no longer what it once was. The muscles that once carried a man without complaint now protest at the simplest commands. The legs that once leapt forward with joy now hesitate. And in that hesitation, something more than strength is lost. It is the loss of certainty, of confidence, of the quiet assurance that every step will land firm and true. A man who once ran without thought now feels the weight of his own limbs, the strain in his knees, the unsteadiness in his gait. And yet, it is not age itself that robs him, but neglect. The slow and steady surrender to stillness, the mistaken belief that weakness is an inevitable companion rather than a preventable foe. The answer is simple, though not easy. The legs must be called back into service, not with recklessness, but with discipline. The greatest strength is not found in the reckless striving of youth, but in the steady persistence of one who refuses to be diminished. And so he lifts his leg, not in some grand display of strength, not for the approval of others, but for himself, for the quiet reclaiming of what should never have been lost. He straightens his knee, holds the limb aloft, feels the burn in his thigh, and then lowers it again. A small thing, an insignificant motion to the eyes of the world, but in truth, it is a declaration. A man who lifts his leg today will walk more confidently tomorrow. The muscles respond, the limbs remember their duty, and the body, though it once threatened rebellion, now submits to the will of the man who commands it. And yet it is not only the body that must be strengthened, but the mind. For weakness does not arrive with a loud cry, but with a whisper, with small concessions and quiet defeats. A man one day avoids the stairs, another day chooses the shorter path, and before long, he no longer trusts himself to venture far at all. He tells himself it is caution, that he is merely being wise, but in truth, He has given in to fear, the fear of falling, of failing, of being seen in his weakness. And here, the battle must be fought with more than muscle. A man must train not only his legs, but his will, must remind himself that he is not yet finished, that strength is not only for the young, that each step he takes is his to claim. It is not a grand battle, nor one that will ever be recognized by those who have never known the struggle. But for the man who has felt his own body waver beneath him, who has known the creeping doubt that comes with unsteady legs, it is a battle worth fighting, and in winning it, he wins more than strength. He wins freedom, the freedom to walk without fear, to move without hesitation, to live without the constant shadow of his own frailty looming over him. It is a quiet victory, but one more valuable than all the accolades of youth. For in the end, it is not the speed of a man's step that defines him, nor the weight he can lift, but the simple, undeniable fact that he still moves forward, unafraid.